Have you ever found yourself sitting in a quiet room, maybe with a cup of tea in hand, looking out the window and just breathing? No rush, no noise, no one needing something from you. Just you, and a peace you never quite knew how much you needed. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not strange for feeling that way. You see, something shifts as we get older. In our younger years, it feels like we're always on the go. Raising families, managing careers, keeping up appearances, attending events we don't even want to be at just because it's expected. But then, after 70, or sometimes even a bit sooner, we begin to see life with different eyes. The things that once felt so urgent just don't anymore. And suddenly the idea of spending time alone feels less like being left out and more like finally being let in to yourself. Today, we're going to talk about why that matters. About why living alone or simply enjoying your own company after 70 isn't a sign of sadness or isolation. It's a sign of something much deeper, wisdom. Real, hard-earned, beautiful wisdom that only life experience can give. And whether you live alone now, are thinking about it, or just feel a pull toward quieter moments, I hope this conversation helps you see that feeling not only as valid, but as valuable. Let's start with something that touches all of us. The search for peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from things finally going right, but the kind that comes from within. When you've lived a long life, filled with highs and lows, laughter and heartbreak, you begin to understand how rare and precious inner peace really is. And more than that, you begin to protect it. That's what happened with Frank. At 73, he used to be the life of every barbecue. He had stories for days, a loud laugh, and a chair at every card table. But these days, he spends his mornings by the window with a warm cup of coffee and an old jazz record spinning in the background. People still call, still invite him out, but he doesn't always say yes anymore. Not because he's sad, not because he's withdrawn, but because, as he puts it, "I've finally found a kind of calm I didn't even know I was missing." Frank doesn't need to fill his days with sound to feel alive. And that's the first quiet sign of wisdom, respecting your own peace. It's choosing balance over chaos. It's knowing that stillness isn't empty, it's full. Full of thought, full of healing, full of you. And it's not just about peace. There's also a kind of freedom that starts to bloom when you stop needing to please everyone. You might remember a time, maybe not so long ago, when you said yes far more than you wanted to. When turning down an invitation felt like a betrayal. When your smile sometimes hid exhaustion and you stayed longer than you should have just to keep others happy. But now you realize your time is sacred. Your energy is sacred. And perhaps for the first time, you're giving yourself permission to say no without guilt. That's exactly what happened to Linda, 77. She used to feel terrible saying no to her daughter's weekend brunches or her neighbor's weekly bingo nights. She'd go, smile, chat, even when her body begged for rest. But something changed. One day, she simply said, "I can't make it today. I need some quiet." And the world didn't fall apart. In fact, she said it felt like the first honest breath she'd taken in years. Linda didn't stop caring about people. She just started caring about herself too. That's not selfish. That's self-respect. And people who choose to be alone after 70 often carry that quiet strength. They've stopped waiting for applause. They've stepped off the treadmill of earning approval. And in that stillness, they've found something applause could never give them: peace without performance. Now you might be thinking, but don't we need people? Don't we need social connection? Of course we do. But here's the thing. Connection doesn't mean crowds. It means meaning. It means authenticity. It means depth. When you've been through enough seasons of life, you start to notice the difference between someone who truly sees you and someone who's just passing the time. And suddenly, those big group dinners or community meetings that once felt important don't feel quite as nourishing anymore. Instead, you might find more joy in a quiet phone call with an old friend or a short chat with the neighbor who really listens. That's what George, 80, discovered. He used to be on every committee in town: library board, veterans group, church council. His calendar stayed full, but in recent years he stepped back. Now he talks to his son every Thursday, plays chess with a kind neighbor once a week, and writes the occasional letter to a friend from college. He says those few connections give him more peace than 100 handshakes ever did. Choosing to be alone doesn't mean giving up on people. It means choosing sincerity over noise. It means being brave enough to walk away from what no longer feeds your spirit and standing strong in the space that remains. And let's be honest, choosing to live alone or to enjoy solitude more than before takes courage. It takes clarity. It takes the kind of wisdom that comes from decades of navigating relationships, responsibilities, and expectations. The kind of wisdom that tells you it's okay to change. It's okay to slow down. It's okay to want something simpler, quieter, truer. Because at the end of the day, the relationship you have with yourself might just be the most important one of all. And spending time with yourself, really being with yourself, helps you hear your own thoughts, honor your own needs, and remember who you are outside of all the roles you've played. You've been the parent, the spouse, the friend, the worker, the caregiver. But who are you when the room is quiet? Who are you when it's just you, your memories, your breath, and your heart? That question might sound heavy, but it's actually one of the most freeing questions you can ask. And when you start to answer it, when you start to sit with it without distraction, you may find that you're not lonely at all. You're finally in good company, your own. There's something quietly powerful about learning to be your own source of comfort. And it's not about shutting the world out. It's about learning how to show up for yourself in ways no one else ever could. Because after 70, many people begin to realize they don't need to rely on others for their happiness, their validation, or even their emotional stability. They've become their own anchor. That's exactly what happened with Evelyn, 76. After losing her husband, she was terrified of the silence. She said the nights felt endless and the quiet was deafening. At first, she tried to fill every hour, TV always on, background noise, constant phone calls. But over time, something shifted. She started taking morning walks. She began writing her thoughts down in a small journal. She even sat in the stillness just to see what it had to teach her. And what she found surprised her. It didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt sacred. She said, "I realized I miss him, yes. But I'm still here. I still matter. And I don't need to be surrounded to feel whole." That kind of self-reliance doesn't happen overnight. It's built over years of life, loss, love, and learning. And it's one of the clearest signs of wisdom, when you stop looking outside of yourself to feel okay, and instead begin to trust that you can hold your own heart through any storm. And it doesn't mean you avoid emotions either. Quite the opposite. People who embrace solitude after 70 often feel things deeply, but they've developed the emotional tools to sit with those feelings rather than run from them. They don't numb, they don't panic, they breathe through it. They reflect. They allow. That kind of inner strength is invisible to the outside world, but it's deeply felt on the inside. Spending time alone also creates a kind of space that can be transformative. Not just relaxing or quiet, but deeply reflective. When the noise dies down, when the distractions fade away, you start to really see yourself. You think about where you've been. You revisit the past, not to dwell, but to understand. You start making peace with things that used to haunt you. And you begin asking bigger questions like, what truly matters now? And what kind of life do I want in this season? That's what Thomas, 78, found when he began slowing his days down. He spends his mornings reading books he never had time for. Philosophy, poetry, a little history. His afternoons are quiet. He tends a small garden, talks to the flowers like old friends. And in the evenings, he writes in a notebook that no one else reads. It's not for anyone but him. His thoughts, his insights, his regrets, his gratitude. He says, I've learned more about myself at this age than I ever did when I was young and busy. Because now I finally have time to listen. That kind of reflection isn't for show. It's not posted, praised, or paraded. It's just lived. And that, in itself, is a kind of wisdom we don't always talk about, but we should. Because when you allow space for your inner world to unfold, you stop rushing. You start noticing. You begin to see beauty in small things and meaning in quiet places. And suddenly, the life you're living, no matter how simple, feels more full than it ever did when it was packed to the brim. And there's something else that begins to shift too. Your boundaries become clearer. Not in a harsh way, but in a gentle, firm, and life-affirming way. When you've spent decades being pulled in 1,000 directions, raising kids, managing family, working, pleasing, you eventually reach a point where you say, I don't want to do that anymore. Not out of resentment, not out of rebellion, just out of clarity. Barbara, 74, used to be that person. The one who never missed a family event. The one who answered every phone call, volunteered at every bake sale, said yes even when her body was crying out for rest. But now she checks in with herself first. She still shows up, but only when it aligns with what feels right in her heart. She no longer forces herself to be everywhere or everything to everyone. She's learned that saying no isn't closing a door, it's opening one to yourself. That kind of boundary setting is often misunderstood. People might say, she's changed, or she doesn't come around much anymore. But what they don't see is what's happening on the inside. Peace, health, balance. A quieter life, yes, but one that actually fits. People who enjoy solitude after 70 have learned that protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's sacred. And it's smart. Because when you honor your limits, you don't burn out. You don't resent. You don't fall apart. You thrive. In your own way. At your own pace. And that's the thing about living alone, or spending more time by yourself as you age. It doesn't mean you're disconnected. In many cases, it means you're more connected than ever to what actually matters. To your needs, your rhythms, your intuition. You notice when something feels right and when it doesn't. You sense when a conversation lifts you up or when it drains you. You feel the difference between obligation and joy. And you learn to choose joy more often. These aren't lessons you can rush. They don't come from books or advice columns or even the best intentions of friends. They come from time. From trying and failing and learning and letting go. They come from getting it wrong and from finally getting it right. And if you're at that stage in your life now, or heading toward it, know this. Wanting to be alone more often isn't something to hide or explain. It's something to honor. It's not a flaw. It's not something that needs fixing. It might just be the most natural, necessary shift your soul has been waiting for. You've given so much of yourself over the years. You've supported others, lifted them up, made sacrifices, filled your calendar with things you didn't always want to do. Now is the time to pour back into yourself, to listen to your own heart, to spend time not just living, but truly being. And maybe that means waking up slowly, sitting with a sunrise, taking long walks with no destination, reading what you love, napping when you feel like it, listening to the birds, talking to your plants, writing down memories, laughing at old jokes, crying when something touches you, saying no when it's right, saying yes when it's real. Because when you start living this way, intentionally, gently, truthfully, you don't need approval. You don't need the noise. You don't need the crowds. You have something far better, a life that's truly yours. There's something deeply refreshing about living at your own pace. No rush, no performance, no need to be anything other than exactly who you are. And one of the quiet blessings of getting older is realizing that you don't have to do more to matter. You don't have to stay busy to feel valuable. In fact, some of the most meaningful moments in life unfold in the slowest hours. That's the beauty of intention. After 70, many people who enjoy being alone aren't doing less. They're simply doing what matters more. They've stopped chasing trends or trying to keep up. They're not interested in keeping score anymore. The scoreboard has faded, and what's left is space, precious space, to fill with what feels true. It might be a walk around the block, a homemade meal cooked just for yourself, or the kind of deep, honest conversation that only happens when two people really see each other. Henry, 81, used to start his days like many of us did in our working years, glued to the news, flipping through emails, juggling back-to-back phone calls. His mornings were loud, scattered, and over before he even had a moment to breathe. But one day, he realized he didn't want to begin his day with the world's noise anymore. He started small, just a glass of water in silence. A few minutes by the window. A quiet stretch before breakfast. Over time, that silence grew. Now he says he feels calmer, steadier, more rooted than he ever did when he was hustling through his days. And that's the lesson many older adults come to embrace. It's not about how much you do, it's about how you feel doing it. Solitude, when chosen with intention, isn't a sign of disconnection. It's a sign of clarity. You stop wasting time on what drains you and start investing it into what nourishes you. You begin to ask questions like, is this helping me grow? Or, does this bring me peace? And if the answer is no, you give yourself permission to let it go. There's a power in that kind of discernment. A wisdom that doesn't come from textbooks or advice columns, but from living. From years of trying things that didn't fit, of pouring your energy into things that never gave back. And now, instead of repeating those patterns, you choose differently. You choose quieter paths, simpler joys, deeper truths. And in that choosing, something magical happens. You become more present, not just with others, but with yourself. You start to notice the details, the way the light hits the floor in the afternoon, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning. Life slows down, not in a sad way, but in a sacred one. It stops racing past you. You start walking beside it. That's not something everyone understands. Some people might see you're quiet and mistake it for loneliness. They might not understand why you don't go out as much, or why your phone isn't always ringing, or why you seem content with your own company. But that's okay. They don't have to understand. You're not here to explain yourself. You're here to live in a way that feels right to you. And if you've reached this point, where you've stopped apologizing for your peace, where you no longer feel the need to justify your choices, that, my friend, is wisdom. That is freedom. Because the truth is, this stage of life, your 70s, your 80s, and beyond, it's not about fading into the background. It's about blooming in a different direction. You've been through so many chapters already, some filled with joy, others with heartbreak, and all of them have shaped you into the person you are today. A person with stories, with scars, with softness, with strength. And now, you get to decide how the next chapter reads. You get to fill the pages however you choose. Maybe you'll start painting again. Maybe you'll finally write those letters you've been thinking about. Maybe you'll take that solo road trip, or just sit in your favorite chair with a book and let the world turn without needing to chase it. Whatever it looks like, know this. Choosing solitude is not about giving up. It's about tuning in. It's about honoring your time, your energy, your spirit. It's about reclaiming yourself, not because you lost who you were, but because now you finally have the space to return to that person fully. So the next time someone tells you you're too quiet or wonders why you spend so much time alone, smile gently. Maybe even thank them for reminding you just how far you've come. Because in a world that's always shouting, choosing stillness takes courage. In a world that's always performing, choosing presence takes strength. And if you're watching this and recognizing yourself in these stories, let me say this clearly. There is nothing wrong with loving your own company. There is nothing sad about spending time alone. In fact, it might be one of the wisest, bravest, most beautiful things you've ever done. You've earned this peace. You've earned the right to rest, to reflect, to grow in your own way. And there's no age limit on self-discovery. There's no expiration date on joy. So here's to you, the quiet thinkers, the deep feelers, the soft speakers, the boundary setters, the peace seekers. You are not forgotten. You are not strange. You are not alone in your aloneness. You are wise. And I hope you know how much strength that takes. If this message spoke to you, if even one part of it made you feel seen, I invite you to leave a comment below. Share your experience. Let others know they're not alone in their journey either. Sometimes, even in solitude, we can still lift one another up. And if you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more thoughtful, honest conversations like this. Ones that honor where you've been and inspire where you're going. Thank you for spending this time with me. It means more than you know. Here's to living your truth, protecting your peace, and finding joy in the stillness. You deserve that every single day.